Welcome into the latest edition of the Trey Wallace Podcast. I am Trey Wallace, happy to be joined by Saturday Down South national columnist, correspondent, you name it. He does everything. Connor O'Gara, what's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's nice to do a little home and home with you. Had you on the Saturday Down South podcast last week, be able to come on your show this week. I feel like there's like a million things that we can talk about as we get into bowl season. So yeah, man, I guess because I went in like 12 different directions with you. So it's only fitting that we probably do the same with me.
No, man, it happens. And we're getting into the crazy part of bowl season, kind of like, the mid-majors are out of the way. Now we're starting to get some of the bigger games that folks can get excited about towards the future, starting on like Friday. And you get a nice matchup Friday night with Tennessee, Clemson, a couple other matchups scattered, throughout the day, then getting into Saturday. If we're looking outside of Ohio State and Georgia and TCU, Michigan, are there two or three games that stand out to you? They're like, okay, these have little implications towards maybe the 2023 season.
How about South Carolina, Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl? Really interested to see the way that this plays out for Spencer Rattler, somebody who has just had a season that I don't know if there's a recent comp to it where, man, after those first 10 games, everybody who was low on Spencer Rattler was like, see, this is why this was never going to work. What a horrible decision. South Carolina kind of wasted a year with all these great skill players, a lot of Marcus Satterfield hate. And now, just like that, after the two games that Spencer Rattler had, he's got a chance to do something very unique. And I wonder how that impacts his NFL draft status. I wonder if he is deciding based on how he performs in this game and the feedback that he gets, if he's coming back for another year. Shane Beamer would love to be able to move past sort of the awkwardness of these last few weeks with Marshawn Lloyd, Jaheim Bell entering the transfer portal. So I've got a lot of attention on that game. And then obviously against the Notre Dame team that's had a very herky-jerky year in itself for year one of the Marcus Freeman era. So looking forward to that. And then a game that I'm going to be at right after I come back from the Peach Bowl will be the ReliaQuest Bowl, which I still want to call the Outback Bowl because come on, let's
the Outback Bowl.
It's still the Outback Bowl. Like let's be real. But yeah, seeing the way that Zach Arnett responds to a very atypical situation. I think it was Ross Dellinger who said this is the first time that a sitting head coach has died while active since like Randy Walker 2006. I mean, This is very strange to see this set of circumstances. Fortunately for Zach Arnett, a few weeks to be able to prepare. We know that he had full autonomy on that side of the ball on defense. So you would hope that Mississippi State with a veteran quarterback and Will Rogers is going to be ready to go. I don't think they're losing that football game. I just don't. I'm kind of amazed that the spread is only Mississippi State -1, seeing as how Illinois is not going to be playing with Chase Brown, who's kind of the heart and soul of that offense. So I'm really looking forward to being able to see the way that Mississippi State responds. But yeah, there's intrigue. You want to get into Kentucky and Iowa, the rock fight that could happen there.
Are they going to get the 31 points? Like, that's the biggest thing that stands out to me. Well, they hit it.
How's that, dude? How's that over under not in the 20s? It's going to be bad, but I'm looking forward to it. That's got the Sickos committee written all over it.
It's one of those games where, and I put it in a column that I had written this week. It's like, okay, what are you getting out of the offenses? You have no idea. Are you going to get something out of Kentucky running game? Okay, well, that's going to be interesting and hard to find out. And then you look at, their defense. Like I honestly, and look, we could all be wrong, and they come out, and this game is 52-51 at the end, and it's absolute madness. But it's crazy to see, in a way, just how far Kentucky fell this season after things started going wrong in Oxford. You had the Will Levis injury. Things kind of snowballed from there. They're practicing this week in the Vanderbilt indoor facility, which is crazy because Vanderbilt defeated them in Lexington. Like, what was your take real quick, like overall what Kentucky did this year? Maybe missed out on that opportunity?
That opportunity was sitting there. It really was. And it's an interesting sliding doors moment for the way that this year could have played out. There's a few of those in the SEC this year. KJ Jefferson the leap and fumble that he had against A&M. I wonder how Arkansas's year could have turned out had he just been able to score, or if they had just settled for a field goal on that play. I think that kind of changed things for the way that it played out for them. And you can make the same case with Levis with that fumble against Ole Miss, or not against Ole Miss, but yeah, on the road in Oxford. And we see the Chris Partridge celebration afterwards. And all of a sudden Kentucky goes from being a potential like borderline top 5 team at the time to kind of falling apart. And what was different about this Kentucky team compared to any we've seen in recent memory with Mark Stoops is their offensive line was not the big blue wall. It was the big blue gate. Right. It really was. And that if you don't have that steady foundation, it actually worked against Kentucky in what Will Levis brings to the table. Will Levis has, and I don't want to get this twisted, but he has a little bit of that Joe Burrow hang in the pocket. I'm not afraid to take a hit. I will run. I will initiate contact. And I thought with this offensive line, that actually hurt them. And that's why they look so stuck in the mud. And the play calling just never really worked out with Rich Scangarello, who replaced my doppelganger, Liam Cohen. Ironically enough, the predecessor now becomes the successor. Right. So it was just a weird, strange year for Kentucky. The disjointed Chris Rodriguez thing with him missing the first few games, he comes back. But still, I just think not having that offensive line and also having 2 true freshman receivers on the outside. I think Berrien Brown and Dane Key are a key reason why Devin Leary ultimately decided to come to Kentucky, and the fact that they get to play in that pro style scheme that Liam Cohen's going to bring from the Los Angeles Rams. But I think it was just a strange year in which you had high expectations for Kentucky coming off the Florida game, and it never really worked out. And I wonder if just because they didn't have anything that was steady outside of a defense that was good, but still dealt with some of those injuries in the front 7.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at Kentucky. Then you look at a team like South Carolina who kind of did the opposite. I mean, the 2 big wins to end the regular season, you're like, okay, whoa, wait a minute. This changed the trajectory. And then all of a sudden, South Carolina fans go into full panic mode after the season, and I get, Satterfield, that mess. You bring it in Dow Loggins. Okay, understandable with what's kind of going on. Still, the hire is interesting to say the least, but then you look at the players that enter the portal, but then they go back and add others. What do you think was the culprit to cause the freak out from Carolina fans over that 3-week period right after the regular season?
I really think a lot of it was centered around the offensive coordinator in the way that played out. When Marcus Satterfield, very early on in the coaching carousel, we find out that he is going to Nebraska. He's going to join forces with Matt Rule and what he's trying to build in Lincoln. I think there was an assumption of, great, this worked out best for all parties. South Carolina is going to be able to make a big headliner hire at OC. A guy that you talked to, Dan Mullen, is kind of rumored to be one of these candidates. And South Carolina is feeling like, okay, this is a great sell. Shane Beamer's not going to micromanage the offense. You're going to be able to get a big-time splashy offensive coordinator. All guys that, maybe we're going to lose a couple of guys here or there to the NFL draft. That's to be expected. But then when it's like, oh, wait, Jaheim Bell, draft eligible, enters the portal. Marshawn Lloyd, draft eligible, enters the portal. And it's not just a Marcus Satterfield, because the Jaheim Bell, Marcus Satterfield thing, that dynamic was bizarre.
It was
the way that it was real bad. And when Mom's getting involved and Mom's teeing off on the OC, that's kind of all she wrote. So there was this hope that maybe that once Marcus Satterfield was kind of out of the picture, that these guys would come back and the good vibes would be back with Shane Beamer's program. And that just didn't happen. And now maybe there's, some relationships there that just couldn't be mended ultimately with the way that it played out. But this is a great test for Shane Beamer. It really is. And he's somebody that, I think he had to kind of stick his neck out a little bit with this hire of Dow Loggins, somebody that I think let's call it what it is. It underwhelmed South Carolina fans, but he's earned, I think, the respect to be able to make these personnel moves because they're in such a better place right now than what anybody could have imagined coming off the year that they had in 2020. To think that they can get a 9th win against a team like Notre Dame to finish the year the way that they did, to me, that's a testament to what he's built so far. So yeah, just a strange situation, especially with how well they finished the year.
Okay, so now I want to switch to Tennessee Clemson before we get into the semifinal games and the portal and whatnot. What you look at this game and you've got, Cade Klubnik playing quarterback for Clemson. You have got Joe Milton at quarterback for Tennessee. Tennessee's without Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, Jeremy Banks. He's not going to be playing on defense for Tennessee. He's declared for the NFL draft. And there's a few more on the Clemson side as well defensively. Like, this is shaping up to be a 2023 primer. It's almost like a exhibition spring game to see what you've got with your players right now heading into next season. How do you look at this matchup and decipher, okay, this is a good way to cap off the 2022 year, but now we're also looking ahead at the quarterbacks that we have and even the running back situation?
Trey, do you remember the 2020 Cotton Bowl with Oklahoma and Florida?
Yeah.
Could be a similar situation. And maybe that's a little bit different because Kyle Trask started in that game. What do you have, like 3 first quarter interceptions or something?
Yeah, it was bad.
It was real bad. And I wonder, and the comp that I've made for Tennessee a little bit this year is 2020 Florida, and a team who finished the year very, very poorly. And all of a sudden, Dan Mullen's talking about, this was the 2020 season ended. We were turning the page to 2021, and that bowl game is like, dude, your team, yes, I understand you didn't have your full guys. That was just bad. Your team did not show up ready to go, and you got blown out by that Oklahoma team with the guy that we were just talking about, Spencer Rattler. And I think it's a fascinating opportunity for Joe Milton. I think there is more pressure on Joe Milton than any non-playoff player. And I mean that because if he comes out and looks like the guy that we saw at the start of 2021, or even the guy who played the majority of that game against Vandy, where you're just kind of like, the passing game is just really not in sync, then that's a problem. Because he's already had 2 opportunities to start at Power 5 programs, and we know the talents. We know that he can throw an orange 110 yards. I mean, it's unbelievable to watch. Right. Like, it truly is. And I think that if you're Joe Milton, you have to come out and show Josh Heupel, who is just, we talked about this before. I think Josh Heupel has a fascination with Joe Milton, dating back to recruiting him when he was in Orlando. And Josh Heupel, of course, was coaching at UCF, and Joe Milton was this stud recruit coming out of the Orlando area. And I think he wants to see him take over this offense. And if you could do that against a Clemson team that's still going to have Brian Brzee, still going to have a lot of those guys on defense, I know they won't have Miles Murphy, then that would say a lot in terms of what your program has and whether or not it needs to go to the portal to be able to get a guy that can run the offense next year. Because if you're hoping that Nico is going to be the guy next year, I think you're a bit ambitious, and I don't think you want to design your program around a true freshman starting if you hope to be able to sustain a top 10 level of success.
Well, my biggest thing with Nico is you're hitching the wagon for the future, but I don't know if that future needs to be in 2023. Like, look, we've seen freshmen come in and we've seen them take over and we've seen them play and lead programs. But like, for me, I could see like Nico making his first appearance 6 games into the season if need be. There's no reason to rush this kid who, by the way, probably needs to put on about 25 pounds. He's got to learn the offense. And I think, when you look at it right now, they've got a backup in Taven Jackson, who's got a hell of an arm, he's been in the system now. He knows how to run it. So they've got some options. And I don't see them. The only reason I would see them going to the transfer portal is maybe after spring to give them some kind of insurance if they need it, a gamer that can come in. But I agree. I think the most pressure is on Joe Milton because this is your tryout. And I don't want to say last tryout, but this is on the grand stage. Can you get it done? Can you keep the ball inside Hard Rock Stadium? And by the way, he does have an advantage here. In my opinion, he's been working with the receivers that will play on Friday night, the second string receivers. He's been working with them all season long. So I agree. The pressure is on Joe Milton in this game. We'll see if he comes through, and we'll see what kind of game we get on Friday night. But let's look ahead now. Let's get to Saturday. We have got, you've got an Alabama-Kansas State game. It's going to kind of kick off the day. And then we get into the late afternoon games in the semifinals. Real quick, what are you looking for out of Alabama, Kansas State? Is this more of a Bryce Young, Swan Song going out type of deal? Is that what you're thinking?
I think it is. And look, I don't think we should lose track of Alabama has played in so many of these close games this year. I mean, Vegas has finally caught up to it. And I saw the spread. That game is -6.5, which a lot of people might be looking at that like, wait, you're at full strength. You got Will Anderson playing too. Why isn't the spread 13 or 14 points? And part of that is because Kansas State's a really good football team. They just won the Big 12. They just played a great game down to the wire that we watched together in the Big 12 championship. And right. This is something where I think there's a difference in opinion in terms of what Alabama was this year and what their potential was. Now, they could have their best game of the year and win this game by 21 points. And we would say, you know what? There will be some who say this is why Alabama should have been in the playoff. No, Alabama didn't deserve a spot in the playoff. They absolutely did. There's no way. They played 5 games that were decided in the final minute. This could be another one of those. Even if all of those guys who, look, I think that we're going to get – I don't think this is going to be some sort of scenario in which Bryce Young and Will Anderson play a quarter then sit. I don't think that's going to be the case if there's any concern about that. I think they're going to get the full game. Now, do I think that Nick Saban would like Bryce Young to throw the football 40 times and potentially risk injury? No. I hope above all else that those 2 guys stay healthy, because I don't want those takes. I don't need the people telling me that, this is why you shouldn't play in these bowl games and blah, blah, blah. Let's just celebrate the fact that 2 of the best players that we've seen at their respective positions in the last decade are playing in one more football game, and it's a football game that should be fun. We're going to get Deuce Vaughn playing in this one. Who knows what the Kansas State quarterback situation is going to look like? It's been all over the place this year.
Is it Howard or Martinez? How's it going to play out? Yeah,
I don't know. Like, they're going to run the ball a ton. It should be a great game though, and it's appointment viewing. I think Alabama wins, but I do still think it's like a 1-possession type game. And I think that spread is pretty indicative of what Alabama has become this year. But let's just not do the thing where we say that Alabama deserved to make the playoff, even if they win this game by 17 points or something like that, and then just compare it to what the results were against TCU. To me, that's just ignoring the rest of the resume.
No, and I think that gets in the weeds, and we don't really need to get in the weeds. And there's a lot of stuff to stay out of the weeds of in that game. So, no, I agree. Okay. Last 2 games that we're going to look at here, and there's other games going on January 2nd and whatnot that are going to be fun to tune into, but the semifinal games, Georgia, Ohio State, TCU, Michigan, just off the top of your head, which game stands out to you the most as like, okay, this one could get a little bit weird?
I think that Georgia, Ohio State is really interesting. I do. And part of it is because these 2 teams are 2 of the 5 who, when fans say that we need more new blood in the playoff, they talk about these 2 teams as like kind of the boring, they're there every year, but they haven't played each other. And this is a unique matchup for Kirby Smart's defense, because they're coming off a game against LSU in which, we saw it, like LSU with 2 different quarterbacks, 506 passing yards. They have to be able to correct that, because we know that when Ohio State is at its best, it's because CJ Stroud is slinging it all over the place. Those receivers, headlined by Marvin Harrison Jr., are making plays. They got big throwing windows, and they look like this juggernaut. And their defense with Jim Knowles is improved. But the thing that I question with Ohio State is, do they have that gear? Because when they've been punched in the mouth, as we've seen the past 2 years against Michigan, they've wilted. And they haven't been this team that can play that 60-minute game against a team that is on that level talent-wise with them. And I wonder how they're going to stack up protecting against that Georgia defensive line, which we know Jalen Carter, you're going to sign up to play 60 minutes against that dude. Good luck. Forget about it. Yeah. And the thing, what's been so overlooked, Stetson Bennett hasn't been sacked since mid-October. Think about that.
Wow.
That's a long time. Georgia's offensive line is coming into this one. And Cedric Van Pran, if you saw some of the pregame comments talking about this, they didn't win the Joe Moore Award, and Michigan did again.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think that unit comes out and looks like a group that's kind of pissed off. And looks like the group that has been so dominant in the latter half of the season and is able to kind of take out the key guys for Ohio State on that defensive line, Zach Harrison, Tuamolo, like is able to kind of eliminate those guys and just say, all right, we're going to continue to do what we do best. We're going to have balance on offense. We're going to run some tempo, and we're just going to take it to you. I think Georgia does that. I think ultimately a game that could get weird. If Ohio State wins this, it'd be like, oh man, is this 2017 Bama all over again? Losing to your rival, getting a backdoor way into the playoff. But I just, in my heart of hearts, this game being in Atlanta, I can't see Georgia losing this game. And I think they ultimately win by about 3 scores.
Yeah, I think it comes down in the fourth quarter. I think Georgia breaks away. I think they get after Stroud too much in the backfield, cause him problems, maybe force an interception where it's, 7-10 point game. All of a sudden it's a 17-point game, drop of the hat. So I think that game stands out to me, as an interesting one that could get out of hand. But then I look at Michigan, TCU, and I think, okay, Max Duggan is the type of gritty player that can keep you in a game if the defense can somehow hold off J.J. McCarthy and even the running game of Michigan without Blake Corum. And it's interesting because we saw it in the Ohio State matchup. It doesn't feel like this doesn't feel like a blowout type game, but it does feel like a redemption game for Michigan this year after laying an egg against Georgia and Miami last year. So I don't think the moment's going to be too big for Michigan. I'm interested to see what the moment is like for TCU, Connor.
I am too. And I wonder if this is a team who I don't want to say get exposed, because that's the wrong way to phrase it. That word just sounds like, oh, you're a fraud. We associate those two so closely together. And I think if you're saying exposed, you're saying Sonny Dykes' team wasn't as good as it was. I think they figured out a way to win close games. They're not a dominant team. They have a great knack for being able to flip a switch in the second half of a football game. And even if it isn't pretty, they still just find ways to make plays. They extend drives on third down, and they just kind of have this attitude of like nothing's really going to fluster them. And Ohio State looked flustered against Michigan. Ohio State looked like a team that once the wheels started falling off, they couldn't recover. TCU, even in that game against Kansas State, where they're down a couple scores in the fourth quarter, they find ways to recover and just have that long drive to just say, no, we're going to give you everything that we possibly have. I think it's a good down to the wire game. I really do. And yeah. I think Michigan has something to prove for the exact reason that you brought up with the way that last year's semifinal played out. It's one thing to beat up against Big Ten competition. I think the Big Ten has been kind of down these last couple of years. It's another to get into one of these neutral site environments and show that you're not just a one-dimensional offense. Michigan still, in my opinion, still has to show that it can beat you with its quarterback. And I get that J.J. McCarthy is the 5-star. This is why you make the move away from Cade McNamara. He might have been the safer guy given the experience that he has, but these are the moments in which you need to see that 5-star quarterback really take that next step. Can he do that against TCU? Because defensively, they're not world beaters, but they've been solid this year. And I think that this ends up being a great down to the wire game, but I agree. I think Michigan gets some redemption and gets to play for a national championship.
We'll just see if it's going to be against Ohio State, which we both don't think is going to happen, but a Georgia-Michigan rematch would be very interesting for the national championship in Los Angeles. So I'll take it. I don't care who's playing. Just give me a good game coming out of that one. So it'll all play out. Lots of interesting stuff going on over the next week or so as we get ready for the national championship game next weekend. We've got semifinals first this weekend, New Year's Eve. Should be a great slate of games on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then we're going to go right back into it on Monday. So just keep paying attention, enjoy college football, and remember that it doesn't matter about the opt-outs and whatnot. Just enjoy the game that you're getting to watch. I think that's the biggest thing, Connor.
Hey man, just enjoy it. Let's not get caught up in who's playing, who's not. You can say that it's not the same as it was when you were a kid, and it's different than your dad's college football. Whatever, that's fine. It's still college football, and we're still gonna enjoy the crap out of the next week and a half.
That's awesome, Connor. Tell everybody where they can follow you, buddy, and your fantastic work.
Yeah, appreciate that. I always tell people just bookmark SaturdayDownSouth.com. Lots of great coverage that we're doing ahead of all things bowl. We're going to be recapping stuff. We've got all the transfer portal news that you could ever want. A lot of things to still try and keep track of. My head has been spinning for the last few weeks. And then, we're on Twitter at SatDownSouth. My Twitter handle is at CJ O'Gara, Saturday Down South Podcast. We have a lot of stuff going on right now. Very, very busy time, but we're in the home stretch, man. We've almost made it.
That's Connor. I'm Trey Wallace with another edition of the Trey Wallace Podcast. Enjoy the college football bowl season, the semifinals. Check in next week. We're going to get ready for the national championship game. Connor, thanks so much for joining us, brother.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, man.
See you soon.